Page 3 now, the 2014 gubernatorial campaigns. 36 states and 3 territories are electing governors. Several states are still considered toss-ups with razor-thin margins between the candidates. In Illinois, it's one of the closest contests according to polling. Democrat incumbent Pat Quinn is in a statistical dead heat with Republican challenger Bruce Rauner. Now, in the Sunshine State, Florida, Governor Rick Scott trails Democrat challenger Charlie Crist. However, the margin there is less than a point. Of course, Crist is a former Republican, turned independent, turned Democrat, which begs the question, what exactly makes Charlie Crist tick?
Charlie said that he's taken positions for political expediency, meaning to get elected.
That's not true.
That's exactly what he said. And when you say that, then what is he saying this year that he actually believes? Whether it's on taxes or education or abortion or women's rights, what positions is he taking today that he actually is doing just to get elected?
What I think is important is that you're true to your core beliefs, to how you're raised, and that's what I've done. It's frankly why I'm not a Republican anymore. I'm somebody that you can trust. I am who I've always been. I call it the way I see it. I am for education. I want to protect our environment. Women should have the right to choose. We ought to raise the minimum wage. These are things that I feel very strongly about and always have.
Florida is just one of several states in the toss-up category. So, what's going on here? Will we have a coast-to-coast gubernatorial nail-biter? Joining me now, political commentator and columnist at Communities Digital News and Daily Ledger contributor T.J. O'Hara. T.J., it looks as though we will have a nail-biter on election night in a lot of these gubernatorial races. And I think that people have kind of forgotten about all these races for governor and really how important they are to the political landscape of this country.
Well, they really are. And I do think we're going to have close elections. A lot of the reason for that is because the candidates tend to take positions rather than offer realistic solutions. So it becomes very difficult to extract what they're going to do if they are elected. All you know is that they polarize their positions and try and play off of one another. But the gubernatorial positions are critically important because of the executive wings of all of our 50 states.
Right, and they can be a balance of power to the state houses, which, maybe Democrat, you have a Republican governor, and vice versa. So let's drill down a little bit. Let's go to Florida. If you're a voter in Florida, really, how can you take Charlie Crist seriously? Here's a guy that was once a Democrat, turned independent, and then, first a Republican, it's hard to keep track, then independent, and now a Democrat. And clearly, if you step back and you look why and this path that he has taken to do this, it's simply for political expediency.
Well, there's no question of the fact that I think Charlie Crist has some credibility issues, to say the least. The problem is, when you look at the two candidates, I don't know if you had an opportunity to see any of the debates, but they reflected more of a tantrum than a debate. The parties were sitting there debating back and forth and challenging each other as to who was more privileged, which has absolutely nothing to do with the state of Florida. And not to be too much tongue-in-cheek, but I'm not particularly a fan of either one.
Yeah, Rick Scott really, obviously, by the polling, hasn't pleased a lot of voters in Florida. His record is, I guess, kind of maybe a little bit wishy-washy, you might say.
Well, I think Rick Scott has the challenge that one of the critical campaign issues has become education. And Rick has professed that he's all for investing in education, but he wants to have strings attached. And Charlie Crist wants to invest with no strings attached. And I would say the more rational approach is Scott's. But you look back and you say, how did he balance the budget? And he took $1.3 billion out of education. So that's where he has a credibility gap.
Okay, so let's go to Wisconsin now. Governor Scott Walker is really in a political fight for his life. And this shouldn't be too much of a surprise because he's had a target on his head for the last several years now, ever since he took on the public sector unions.
Well, absolutely. He's actually the only governor in history, to the best of my knowledge, that ever was successful against a recall election. And he's been battling. It seems like he's constantly in an election process. And it really boils down to collective bargaining versus non-collective bargaining. He took away some of the collective bargaining rights of the public sector. That brought all the union money and all the union attention in, and so they're doing anything they can to unseat him. The real I think, credibility issue from a voter standpoint is that they had a $3.6 billion deficit, and he erased it.
Right.
And the state is doing much better, but they're willing to throw him out because it doesn't comply with union rules.
And this Mary Burke is getting a lot of money from the national level. The Democrats want to unseat Scott Walker for sure. On the other hand, Scott Walker's name has been thrown out there already as a possible presidential candidate for 2016. So he really wants to win this race, you know, not only for governor, but possibly as a springboard to something bigger.
I think that's absolutely true. And of course, Mary Burke has a little bit of a recent challenge over plagiarism. So maybe the best solution is to allow Walker to remain governor and just have Mary Burke write his speeches.
And this Colorado race is interesting with Hickenlooper. He is leading right now, again, if you believe the polling, but he is the incumbent, but it's not a huge lead. And of course, Colorado is famously a former red state, now blue state, but maybe almost turning purple if you kind of read the tea leaves as the Colorado voters is going right now.
Well, Hickenlooper himself is a person who's a little bit of the Wild West Democrat, and the party has not supported him to the degree that you might expect it to because he doesn't always take the party position. Conversely, you've got Beauprez, who's had his Mitt Romney moment where he talked about the 47% and so forth and the people who were working versus the Democratic voters. So both of these people have a tendency to not realize that it's okay to have a thought you don't express.
Now, I want to, real quick, I want to switch back to the Senate race because we just got word before this program went on the air that a new poll out of New Hampshire is showing Scott Brown now in front of Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire. And this has been part of a trend that's been building for the last month and a half, maybe 2 months. If you look at the polling, it's been straight up for Scott Brown and basically straight down for Jeanne Shaheen. Any surprise there?
Not really. I think Scott Brown is an excellent campaigner, and in recent weeks, if you followed any of the ads that Shaheen has been putting out, they're all predicated on the fact that Scott Brown just recently moved to New Hampshire. However, Scott Brown was born in New Hampshire, so it's not as if he doesn't have connections to the state. And it's difficult, in my opinion, for a Democrat to argue that it's inappropriate and you shouldn't consider a senatorial candidate who has moved into the state when you have the famous Hillary Clinton, who was living or was residing technically in Arkansas, living in D.C., and then became the senator from New York.
And how many senators do we know that really don't live in their home states? In fact, they really live in Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
So this is nothing new. TJ, thanks.
You're welcome.